Alright, this video is about when Christianity became evil. And I got a comment recently about what my looks and who somebody thought I was based on my looks. And of course, Western civilization is all based on seeing is believing. And this is from Platonic philosophy, where we rely on geometry as a external left brain dominant measurement. And so the music as frequency is right brain dominant, and the older language is the more musical the language is. And so math professor Luigi Borzicchini was pondering yesterday on his new brain lateralization math article about whether Chinese mathematics he was pondering why they did not use numbers as a analytic algebra with symbols in the equations. And his argument, of course, is that it was the Greek phonetic written language that then enabled a left brain dominant mathematical equation to arise as an algorithm. And of course, with the Chinese language, it is in the traditional Chinese language, it's a right brain ideogram or pictogram. And David Ewing Duncan has a book called Calendar, where he points out that if you try to subtract the lunar calendar from the solar calendar using like Roman numerals or ideograms, then it's the mathematics. It's too difficult to do the calculations. And so if we look at the history of Christianity, we see that the lunar calendar was not allowed, while the solar calendar was the focus. And this was an early split in the Christian church, where one view that became the Eastern Orthodox Church, they argued that Jesus did not, or he did return after his crucifixion. He returned physically and kept teaching. And then the Western Church argued that he did not return after his crucifixion. Or it might have been the other way around. But anyway, this determined when Good Friday was celebrated before Easter, and whether it was tied to the lunar calendar or not. And at first, in the Western Church, Easter was tied to the lunar calendar, and so it had to keep rotating through the year, and it kept getting closer to Christmas. and I don't remember all the details, but it was Francis Bacon in the, I think, 12th century, who then finally developed a calendar to make sure the resurrection was tied just to the solar calendar, but it's still the first full moon. The Easter is celebrated to the closest full moon after the equinox. And so the point being that the mathematics used was based on the Platonic mathematics that argued that from Aristotle, continuing Plato, that anything from the moon and below is not heaven, and it's not eternal, whereas the solar realm as heaven is eternal. And so one of the prominent early Christian beliefs was from Marcion, and he argued that that God was of the Old Testament was not the real God, and that there's a demiurge that is the God worshipped by as the creator God. And this is from Platonic philosophy. And the demiurge is the Platonic form as the matrix creator. And this has to do with the definition of God being left brain dominant based on the Platonic mathematics as an algorithm, so that eternity is defined as a materialistic idealism based on logarithmic mathematics, and this is tied into this originates from Western equal-tempered music theory, so that people are being brainwashed by the Western music as well as the Pythagorean theorem of Western mathematics. And so then when Platonic math was spread into Europe from the Arabs and the Muslims through Spain, then this spread anti-Semitism, because the Platonic philosophy is that a Jewish person cannot convert to Christianity based on Platonic mathematics, that each person is defined as the major second music interval of 9/8 ratio, from trying to contain the perfect fifth as 3/2 into the cube root of, or the square root of 2 from 9/8 cubed. The major second music interval is then compromised into a octave symmetric geometry from the Platonic realm of forms as an ideal of symmetric perfection on Earth. And this is what Professor David F. Noble documents as the religion of technology that started with John Scotus Erigena, the Benedictine monk who was an advisor to the Carolingian Empire. And so then when the New World colonies were created by the British Empire in what became the United States, in 1622, the first law was created that stated that white women could not marry non-Christians, and any children of a non-Christian with a white woman was then considered owned by the owner of the bond servant, and it became a permanent ownership of a bond servant for the rest of the life. So this was called a chattel servant, and the bond servants were paid for by the Virginia corporation, crowned by the king, chartered by the king, and so all their transportation costs were on the front end were paid by the investors and so they owned the bond servant, who then had to work its way out of debt, and then any kind of infraction like fornication would cause the debt to get expanded, in the years of bondage to expand until the bond servant would die, or else the ownership could become permanent as a chattel servant. And since it was a corporate transfer of debt, then this, based on if the person was non-Christian, this was the way of targeting the African Americans. So before it became an explicit white, in the 1700s, it was 1680s, where the miscegenation law was transferred to Africans, so that if a white woman got pregnant by an African male, then the children were always eternally owned as chattel slaves now, and so it became explicitly a creation of the white race as a elite slave master, and punished any at first the chattel slaves were created by outlawing fornication, but then the fornication was transferred into a eternal slave status so that they could now create new slaves through the fornication. And so now it was no longer a Christian definition, but it was a white race supremacy.